No one could touch that bull until a girl in a dress knelt and... Mrs. Wilson watched from the window of the main house as yet another buyer gave up on purchasing her property. Willow Creek Ranch, which had belonged to her family for 3 generations, was about to be auctioned off, all because of a single animal no one could control. The bull emperor snorted furiously in the central pen, his flared nostrils puffing steam into the crisp morning air of Californian countryside. For 3 months, no one had been able to approach him without being met with a rage that left even the most experienced ranch hands terrified. The nearly 1-ton animal had become untouchable after a mysterious incident no one could quite explain. "Mrs. Wilson, another interested family has arrived," announced Samuel, the ranch's oldest cowboy, removing his leather hat as he stepped into the kitchen. The 68-year-old widow sighed deeply, smoothing the embroidered apron she'd worn since her late husband Anthony was still alive. She knew this would just be another wasted effort. Who would buy a ranch with a priceless breeding bull no one could even feed properly? "How many this time?" she asked without much hope. "A young woman with a little girl. They said they came from Los Angeles." Helen Carter parked her dusty white Civic right by the ranch's main gate. At 28, she carried the weight of decisions she never imagined she'd have to make. Beside her in the passenger seat, Madison played with a cloth doll, her brown hair tied in a ponytail that swayed as the car bumped along the dirt road. "Mommy, that house is really big," the 8-year-old remarked, pointing at the colonial building standing majestically at the heart of the property. "It is, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about? We are just going to take a look, okay?" Helen didn't have the heart to tell her daughter she was considering moving to the countryside because life in Los Angeles had become unbearable after the divorce. The little money she'd gotten from the settlement with her ex-husband would be enough to buy a small property where they could start over far from the problems of the big city. Mrs. Wilson greeted them on the porch, offering fresh coffee and cheese biscuits she'd made that morning. Madison was enchanted by the birds singing near the apple trees and shyly waved when the older woman handed her a glass of warm milk. "The ranch is 50 acres with good water and established pasture," Mrs. Wilson explained, trying to keep her tone optimistic. "The cows are all from good stock and we have a breeding bull that..." Her words were cut off by a deafening bellow that echoed across the property. Madison stopped drinking her milk and looked toward the sound with curiosity, but Helen instinctively shrank back. "What was that noise?" the mother asked, concerned. Mrs. Wilson exchanged a meaningful glance with Samuel, who had quietly stepped closer. It was time to tell the truth about the ranch's biggest problem. "That's Emperor," the widow replied, lowering her voice. "Our breeding bull. He's been a little difficult lately." "Difficult how?" Helen pressed, sensing there was more to the older woman's hesitation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Samuel cleared his throat, twisting his hat between his calloused hands. At 55, he'd dealt with all kinds of wild animals, but he'd never seen anything like what had happened to Emperor. "The truth, Mrs. Carter, is that the beast has turned into a monster. Won't let anyone near him. He's already hurt 2 ranch hands and broken 3 gates trying to escape." "Hurt how?" Helen instinctively stood up, pulling Madison closer. "Nothing serious," Mrs. Wilson quickly clarified. "Just some bruises. But Dr. Richards, the town vet, said he's never seen behavior like this. The animal seems furious with everyone." Madison listened intently to the adult's conversation, her big, curious eyes shining with interest. She'd always had a special connection with animals since she was little. In Los Angeles, she was the one who took care of the neighbor's cat when they traveled, and even the fiercest street dogs would calm down when she walked by. "Can I see him?" she asked suddenly, surprising everyone. "Madison, that's not a good idea," Helen replied quickly. "Just from far away, Mom. I promise I won't get close." Mrs. Wilson looked at the girl and felt something strange in her chest. There was something familiar in those eyes, a quiet determination that reminded her of someone, though she couldn't place who. "I think it's fine if she watches from a distance," she finally said. "Samuel, take them to the pen, but keep a safe distance." The group walked across the property, passing the stables where a few dairy cows rested in the shade. The smell of hay and damp earth filled the air, mixed with the scent of magnolia blossoms beginning to bloom with the arrival of spring. When they reached the main pen, Helen had to catch her breath. The bull emperor was truly impressive. His dark coat gleamed in the afternoon sun, his defined muscles tensed with every movement, and his curved horns looked capable of knocking down a tree. But what stood out most were his eyes. There was a deep fury in them, an anguish that seemed desperate to be understood. "My God, he's enormous," Helen murmured. "Weighs over 2,000 pounds, Samuel said proudly. "He's a direct descendant of the Brahmin line the late Anthony brought from Texas 15 years ago. Worth a fortune, if we could sell him." Madison stepped closer to the fence, ignoring her mother's quiet protests. The bull was on the far side of the pen, but when he saw the girl, something shifted in his behavior. His tense muscles relaxed slightly, and he turned his head toward her with a curiosity he hadn't shown in months. "Would you look at that?" Samuel whispered, amazed. He didn't charge the fence when he saw new people. "It really is strange," Mrs. Wilson agreed. "Normally he'd be snorting and pawing the ground by now." Madison stayed there, watching the animal with an intensity that made the adults uneasy. There was something about the way she looked at Emperor, as if she were trying to understand what he was feeling, that made Helen wonder if she should pull her away. "He's sad," the girl said suddenly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Mrs. Wilson crouched beside her. "He's not angry. He's sad and scared. Look at his eyes." Samuel and Helen exchanged skeptical glances, but Mrs. Wilson kept watching the interaction between the child and the animal. Emperor had taken a few steps toward them, his behavior completely different from the aggression he'd shown for months. "Let's go back to the house," Helen suggested, growing nervous at the bull's proximity. "Madison, come on." But the girl didn't move. She kept staring at Emperor, and for an impossible moment it seemed as if the two were communicating through their gaze. The bull lowered his head slightly, almost as if in greeting, before stepping back and resuming his defensive stance. On the walk back, Mrs. Wilson couldn't shake the scene she'd just witnessed. There was something about that girl that stirred old memories, feelings she thought she'd buried with her husband. "Where exactly are you from?" she asked, as they settled back on the porch. "We were born in Los Angeles," Helen answered. "But my family is from the countryside. My grandmother lived in a town near here, 7 Lakes. 7 Lakes? Mrs. Wilson's interest grew. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Rose Carter. Why do you ask?" Mrs. Wilson turned pale for a moment, but quickly composed herself. Rose Carter. She knew that name, but she wasn't sure if she should share the memories flooding back to her. "Just curiosity," she lied. "It's a small region. Sometimes we know each other's families." Helen didn't notice the change in the older woman's tone, but Madison did. The girl had a sharp sense for adult emotions, something she'd developed during the difficult months leading up to her parents' divorce. "Well, I'd like to come back tomorrow to see the property more carefully," Helen said, standing up. "If you don't mind." "Of course not. You're both welcome." As the Civic drove away, kicking up dust on the road, Mrs. Wilson stood on the porch for a long time, lost in thoughts she had tried to forget for over 30 years. Samuel approached, noticing his employer's distant expression. "Mrs. Wilson, are you all right?" "Samuel, do you remember Rose, the woman who worked here when you were younger?" The ranch hand thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Rose Carter, the one who took care of the main house, worked here about 5 years, then left suddenly. Why do you ask?" "That girl." Mrs. Wilson shook her head as if trying to push away dangerous thoughts. "It's nothing, just an old woman's imagination." But it wasn't imagination. There was something in Madison's eyes, the way she moved, even how she had observed Emperor, that stirred painful memories from the ranch's past. Memories her late husband Anthony had asked her to forget, but which might be resurfacing for a reason. That night, Helen and Madison stayed at a simple inn in town. During dinner, the girl couldn't stop talking about the ranch, especially the bull. "Mom, why do you think he's sad?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe big animals get like that sometimes. But Mrs. Wilson said he wasn't like that before. Something happened to him." Helen watched her daughter carefully. Madison had always been sensitive, but her obsession with the bull was starting to worry her. "Honey, if we decide to live on the ranch, you have to promise you'll stay away from that animal. He's dangerous." "I promise," Madison said, but Helen knew the answer came too quickly to be sincere. The next morning, they returned to Willow Creek Ranch. This time, Mrs. Wilson greeted them differently, more reserved, as if she'd spent the whole night thinking about something important. "I'd like to show you the rest of the property," she said, avoiding looking directly at Madison. They walked through the pastures, visited the small cornfield, and saw the facilities for the other animals. Helen asked practical questions about maintenance costs and productivity, while Madison absorbed every detail of the rural setting that fascinated her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. When they passed Emperor's pen again, his reaction was the same as the day before. The bull, which snorted aggressively around Samuel and the other workers, visibly calmed when he saw Madison. "That's impossible," Samuel muttered, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it." "Can I get closer today?" Madison asked with the innocence of an 8-year-old. "Absolutely not," Helen said firmly. But Mrs. Wilson was watching the scene with a thoughtful expression. There was something happening there that she didn't fully understand, but it stirred deep instincts related to the ranch's past. "What if we all stay close by just to see what happens?" she suggested hesitantly. "Mrs. Wilson," Samuel protested. "That beast could jump the fence." "The fence is 6 feet tall, he can't. And we'll stay right here, ready to pull the girl back if needed." Helen was torn between scientific curiosity and the maternal instinct to protect her daughter. But there was something in the girl's insistence, in the way she looked at the bull, that made her feel it might be safe to try. "Just a few steps," she finally agreed, "and at the first sign of aggression, you run back." Madison nodded seriously and slowly approached the fence. Emperor didn't move, only watched her with those large, expressive eyes. When she was about 10 feet from the railing, the bull took a few steps toward her, but calmly, almost respectfully. "Hello, Emperor," Madison said softly. "I'm Madison." The bull stopped where he was and tilted his head, as if truly listening. For a moment that felt endless. Girl and animal stared at each other in absolute silence. "I know you're hurting," the girl continued. "I don't know why, but I know it hurts." That was when something happened that left everyone breathless. Emperor slowly lowered himself, bending his front legs until he was in a position resembling a bow. His eyes never left the girl's face, and for an impossible instant it seemed a tear glistened in his gaze. "Good Lord," Samuel whispered. "In 40 years of working cattle, I've never seen that." Helen was speechless, torn between pride and fear at what she was witnessing. Mrs. Wilson, meanwhile, felt her heart race as long-buried memories began to surge back with full force. "Madison, come here now," Helen said, her voice trembling. The girl obeyed, but not before discreetly waving at Emperor, who rose and followed her with his eyes until she disappeared from view. During lunch in the main house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mrs. Wilson pushed her food around her plate without eating, clearly disturbed by what she had seen. "Mrs. Wilson," Helen finally said, "are you all right? You seem worried." The widow lifted her eyes and stared at Madison for a few seconds before answering. "I need to ask you something that might sound strange. Your grandmother, Rose, did she ever work on ranches when she was young?" Helen seemed surprised by the question. "She did. She always told stories about when she was a girl working on a big ranch." "Why do you ask?" "What kind of stories?" "Oh, mostly about the animals. Grandma Rose said she had a special way with them, that she could calm wild horses and even bulls no one else could handle." Mrs. Wilson's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the plate. Madison looked at her curiously, noticing the woman's strong reaction. "And your grandmother, did she ever mention the name of a specific ranch where she worked?" Helen tried to remember while Madison listened with growing interest. "She talked about a ranch where there was a very special bull. She said the owner was a good man who treated his workers like family, but she never said the name of the place." Mrs. Wilson closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage for something difficult. Helen, I need to tell you something that might change everything you think about this ranch. The tension in the room became almost tangible. Samuel, who had come in to serve coffee, stopped where he stood, sensing something important was about to be revealed. Your grandmother Rose worked here, at Willow Creek Ranch, for nearly 5 years between 1990 and 1995. Helen felt the world spinning around her. What do you mean? She never said... There are things she didn't say for reasons that seemed right at the time, Mrs. Wilson continued, her voice heavy with emotion. Rose Carter didn't leave here by choice. She left because she was expecting a baby. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen tried to process the information, while Madison listened intently, even if she didn't fully grasp the implications of what was being revealed. Whose baby? Helen asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. My husband's, Anthony Wilson. The confession hit like a bolt of lightning. Helen turned pale while Madison looked confusedly between her mother and Mrs. Wilson, sensing the tension but not quite understanding what it meant. That's not possible, Helen stammered. My mother... She never said anything about... Your mother was born here, Helen, at Willow Creek Ranch. Rose came to me years later to tell me after Anthony had already passed. She wanted me to know her daughter existed, but she didn't want anything from the family, just for me to know. The pieces began falling into place in Helen's mind. Her grandmother's vague stories about ranches, her mother's refusal to talk about her father, the constant moves during her childhood. It all made sense now. So you're saying my mother and that you're Anthony's granddaughter, and Madison is his great-granddaughter. Madison didn't fully understand what was happening, but she sensed something very important had changed. She looked at Mrs. Wilson with wide, curious eyes. Does that mean you're my great-grandmother? Mrs. Wilson felt tears welling in her eyes. She had spent the last 15 years alone on the ranch, believing she had no family, and suddenly she discovered she had a great-granddaughter sitting at her table. It means you have family here, my dear, she answered, her voice trembling. Helen was in shock, trying to process everything. Part of her felt anger over all the lies and secrets, but another part began to understand why Grandma Rose had kept it all quiet. Why? She finally asked. Why hide all this? Mrs. Wilson took a deep breath before answering. Because back then, the social gap was too wide. Anthony was married to me, he owned the ranch. Rose was an employee, a simple countrywoman. If the pregnancy had become public, it would have been a scandal that ruined everyone's lives. Rose chose to leave quietly to protect his reputation and her own dignity. And Mr. Anthony, did he know? He found out years later when Rose came back to tell him, and you know what he did. Mrs. Wilson smiled through her tears. He cried for hours because he'd missed the chance to know his daughter. He wanted to find you, to take responsibility, but Rose wouldn't let him. She said she'd already built a new life and didn't want to dig up the past. Madison listened carefully, trying to understand the complex emotions of the adults around her. And Emperor? She suddenly asked, surprising everyone. How does he fit into all this? Mrs. Wilson looked at the girl with admiration. Even at 8 years old, she'd sensed the bull's story was connected to the family revelations. Emperor is the son of Majestic, your great-grandfather Anthony's favorite bull. Anthony had a special gift with animals. He could calm the wildest ones just by being near them. Majestic was completely gentle with him, but aggressive with everyone else. Like Grandma Rose, Helen murmured, beginning to understand. Exactly. Rose had that gift too. She was the one who helped Anthony with the most difficult animals. They made the perfect pair in handling the cattle. Samuel, who had silently followed the entire conversation, finally spoke up. Mrs. Wilson, this explains a lot. Emperor became aggressive right after Mr. Anthony left. Maybe he was missing that special connection. And when he saw Madison, Mrs. Wilson continued the thought. He recognized something familiar, Helen finished, looking at her daughter with new eyes. Madison stood up from her chair, a childlike determination shining in her eyes. Can I try to help him? Madison, no, Helen quickly said. Even if all this is true, he's still a dangerous animal. But Mom, if Great-Grandpa Anthony could calm him down, and if Grandma Rose had the same gift, maybe I do too. Mrs. Wilson was torn. Part of her wanted to protect her newly discovered great-granddaughter, but another part felt this might be exactly what the ranch needed. What if we tried very carefully, she suggested hesitantly, with all the safety precautions? Helen looked to Samuel for support, but the ranch hand seemed to be seriously considering the possibility. Mrs. Carter, I saw what happened this morning. I've never seen Emperor react like that to anyone. Maybe the girl really does have something special. No, Helen said firmly. I won't put my daughter at risk for an animal. Madison walked over to her mother and took her hand. Mom, I'm not afraid of him. He won't hurt me. How can you be sure? Because he's calling for help. He wants someone to understand what he's feeling. The girl's words touched something deep in everyone present. There was a sincerity in her voice, a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her years. Mrs. Wilson stood up and went to an old dresser in the corner of the room. From a drawer, she pulled out a wooden box that had clearly been stored away for many years. Before we make any decisions, I want to show you something. She opened the box and took out some yellowed photographs. The first showed a tall, strong man beside a majestic bull, both in a pose that conveyed mutual trust. This is Anthony with Majestic, Emperor's father. The second photo showed the same man, but this time accompanied by a young woman with a sweet smile and bright eyes. She stood beside a cow and calf, her hand gently resting on the animal's neck. And this is Rose, your grandmother, on the day she helped deliver this little calf. Helen held the photo with trembling hands. It was the first time she'd seen her grandmother so young, and the resemblance to her own mother was striking. There's one more, Mrs. Wilson said, hesitating before showing the last photograph. This one was different. It showed Anthony and Rose together, his hand on her shoulder, both smiling at the camera. There was an intimacy between them that went beyond employer and employee. This was taken just a few months before Rose left the ranch, Mrs. Wilson explained. I found it in Anthony's office after he passed. Helen studied the photo for a long time, trying to reconcile the image with everything she'd believed about her family until now. They loved each other, she finally said, not as a question but as a realization. Yes, Mrs. Wilson confirmed softly, and that's why it was even more painful for everyone. Madison took the photo and examined it with special attention. Great-Grandpa Anthony looks very kind. He was the kindest man I ever knew, Mrs. Wilson replied, her voice filled with longing. And Rose too. Maybe that's why Emperor reacted to you like that. He might be sensing the same kindness he recognized in them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, after much debate and many precautions, they decided to make another attempt to approach Emperor. Samuel brought a long rope and positioned himself nearby, ready to intervene if needed. Helen stayed at a safe distance but close enough to react quickly. Madison approached the fence again, but this time with a different demeanor. She carried a fresh carrot that Mrs. Wilson had fetched from the garden, walking with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Hi, Emperor, she said as she reached the fence. I brought something good for you. The bull approached immediately, his eyes fixed on the girl. When he saw the carrot, he snorted softly, a sound that seemed more like conversation than aggression. You're hungry, aren't you? Madison held out the carrot through the fence. Emperor moved forward with surprising care and gentleness. His movements were slow and respectful, as if he understood he was dealing with someone special. When he took the carrot, his lips briefly brushed the girl's fingers in a tender touch that made everyone present sigh in relief. He's so polite, Madison remarked, smiling. Anthony always said Majestic was a gentleman, Mrs. Wilson recalled. Seems like Emperor inherited that from his father. For the next 20 minutes, Madison spoke softly to the bull, telling him about her life in Los Angeles, the school she attended, and her favorite drawings. Emperor listened attentively, sometimes nodding as if in agreement. I heard you're sad because you lost someone important, the girl said at one point. I was sad too when my daddy left. But sadness fades when you find new love. That was when something extraordinary happened. Emperor lowered his head again, but this time stretched it toward the girl. Without hesitation, Madison reached out and gently touched the animal's forehead. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for everyone to realize something fundamental had changed. When Emperor stood up, there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there for months. "My God," Samuel whispered. "The animal is completely calm." "It's like he found what he was looking for," Mrs. Wilson added, moved. Helen approached slowly, still cautious, but clearly amazed by what she was witnessing. "How did you know what to do?" she asked her daughter. "I can't explain it," Madison answered honestly. "I just felt it was what he needed. Someone who understood he wasn't being mean, just hurting." That evening during dinner, the atmosphere in the big house was completely different. The day's revelations had changed everything, but in a way that felt natural, as if the universe was finally putting the pieces in the right place. "So, will you stay?" Mrs. Wilson asked, hardly daring to hope for a positive answer. Helen looked at Madison, who gazed back with hopeful eyes. "I think so," she finally replied, "if you'll have us here." "If I'll have you." Mrs. Wilson laughed through tears. "My dear, I've spent the last 15 years alone in this house, thinking I had no family in the world. Discovering I have a granddaughter and a great-granddaughter is the greatest gift I could receive." "And I found out I have a great-grandmother," Madison added, smiling. "And a bull friend, too." They laughed, and for the first time in a long while, the big house was filled with the sound of genuine joy. But the happiness of the moment was interrupted by a loud knock at the front door. Samuel went to answer it and returned with a worried expression. "Mrs. Wilson, it's Dr. Richards. He needs to speak with you urgently." The veterinarian Mark Richards entered the room without ceremony, his face showing a mix of curiosity and irritation. "Margaret, I need to understand what's going on here. I got 3 calls today saying the Emperor was as gentle as a lamb. That's impossible with the treatment we've been giving him." "What treatment?" Helen asked, puzzled by the man's tone. Dr. Richards seemed surprised to find visitors in the house, but answered anyway. "We've been medicating the animal for 2 months to control his aggression. It's an expensive treatment, but necessary for everyone's safety." Mrs. Wilson slowly stood up, a look of suspicion growing on her face. "Mark, you never told me anything about medication. You just said he had behavioral issues." "Well, it's technical details I didn't want to worry you with." Samuel cleared his throat discreetly, drawing attention to himself. "Doctor, with all due respect, the animal didn't get any medication today and he was calmer than ever. The girl here even managed to touch him." The veterinarian looked at Madison with an expression mixing disbelief and what seemed like concern. "That's extremely dangerous and irresponsible. The animal could attack at any moment." "But he didn't," Madison said simply. "He just wanted affection." "Child, you don't understand. This bull has a history of aggression that—" "Which started exactly when?" Helen interrupted, her journalist instincts awakened by the strangeness of the situation. Dr. Richards hesitated before answering. "About 3 months ago, right after some issues at the ranch." "What issues?" Mrs. Wilson asked, sensing there was something she didn't know. "Well, there were some failed attempts to buy the property and—" "Are you involved in those purchase attempts?" Helen asked directly. The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Richards looked around the room, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I may have mentioned to a few acquaintances that the ranch was for sale." "Mark," Mrs. Wilson said slowly, her voice carrying an authority Helen had never heard before, "are you telling me you've been spreading information about my property without my permission?" "It's not like that, Margaret. It's just that there are serious investors in the area, people who could put this land to better use." "And what would that better use be?" Samuel asked, his loyalty to his employer evident in his tone. Dr. Richards realized he'd stepped into a delicate situation, but it was too late to back out. "A group of businessmen from Los Angeles wants to turn the area into a tourist complex. Hotels, restaurants, something modern that would bring development to the town." Helen and Mrs. Wilson exchanged meaningful glances. The missing piece of the puzzle was falling into place. "And this group needs our ranch for their project?" Helen asked. "It's one of the central properties in the area they plan to develop." "And an aggressive bull would make the ranch less valuable, making it easier to buy at a low price," Mrs. Wilson completed the thought. The veterinarian turned red, realizing he'd been caught. "Margaret, you're misinterpreting the situation. I just wanted to help." "Help who?" Samuel stood up, his posture protective. "The woman who's trusted you for 15 years, or the out-of-town businessmen who want to take our land?" Madison watched the argument closely, trying to understand the implications of what was being revealed. "Doctor," she suddenly said, with the straightforward honesty of children, "were you giving the Emperor medicine to make him angry?" The simple, direct question left everyone silent. Dr. Richards looked at the girl, clearly unsure how to respond. "It's not quite like that, child. Then it is exactly like that, Mrs. Wilson concluded, her voice colder than Helen had ever heard. "You were medicating my bull to keep him aggressive so I couldn't sell him or keep the ranch running." "Margaret, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Mark. I want you off my property now and don't come back." "You can't do this. I'm the only vet in the area. You'll need my services. I'd rather take my animals to the next town than trust someone who betrayed me." Samuel stepped closer to the vet, making it clear he'd better follow Mrs. Wilson's suggestion without argument. After Dr. Richards left, the group stood in silence for a few minutes, processing everything that had been revealed. "So, you mean Emperor was never really aggressive?" Helen asked. "Most likely the medications were altering his behavior," Mrs. Wilson replied. "Anthony always said animals aren't naturally mean. They react to what they sense around them. And when the drugs left his system today, he returned to his natural behavior," Samuel added. Madison walked up to Mrs. Wilson. "Great-grandma, does this mean the ranch is saved?" Mrs. Wilson smiled, running her hand through the girl's hair. "It means we have a lot of work ahead, but we'll do it together." That night, Helen helped Madison get ready for bed in the room that would be hers in the big house. It was a cozy space with antique furniture and a window overlooking the pastures. "Mom," Madison said while brushing her teeth, "do you think Grandma Rose would be happy knowing we came back to the ranch?" Helen stopped folding clothes and looked at her daughter through the mirror. "I think so, sweetheart. I think she'd be very proud to see how you helped Emperor." "And you? Are you happy we came here?" Helen moved closer and hugged her daughter. "I'm starting to think this was always our place. We just didn't know it yet." The next morning, Madison woke before everyone else and tiptoed out to visit Emperor. The bull saw her approaching and came to the fence, clearly happy to see her. "Good morning, big guy," she whispered, offering an apple she'd taken from the kitchen. "Today's going to be a really good day." Emperor took the fruit gently and stayed put, letting Madison stroke his forehead through the fence. "You know what I found out yesterday?" she said, as if the bull could understand every word. "I have family here. You knew my great-grandpa Anthony and great-grandma Rose. They told me you're the son of Majestic, who was their best friend." The bull shook his head and Madison smiled. "Now we're going to be a real family. You, me, Mom, great-grandma Margaret, and Samuel too. He takes care of everyone." When the adults woke and found Madison chatting excitedly with Emperor, they weren't surprised. The connection between them seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mrs. Wilson greeted. "Already looking after our boy?" "He was telling me he's hungry," Madison replied seriously. "And that he wants to graze in the pasture today." Samuel laughed. "And how did he tell you that?" "He speaks with his eyes," she explained, as if it were obvious, "just like great-grandpa Anthony used to." Mrs. Wilson's heart ached at the mention of her husband, but it was a good pain, full of tender longing. "How about we take Emperor to the big pasture today?" she suggested. "It's been a while since he's left the pen." The idea was met with enthusiasm from Madison and cautious approval from Helen. With all precautions taken, Samuel opened the gate, and Emperor walked out calmly, following Madison as if she were his natural guide. The walk through the pasture was an absolute success. Emperor behaved like a completely different animal, grazing peacefully and responding to Madison's calls with docility. "It's remarkable," Helen commented, watching the scene. It's as if he's a completely different animal. It's the same animal, Mrs. Wilson corrected. He's just returned to being himself. Over the following days, the ranch's routine settled naturally. Helen helped with administration, applying knowledge she'd gained working in offices in Los Angeles. Madison became Samuel's official assistant in caring for the animals, showing a natural talent that impressed everyone. But the peace was disrupted a week later when a black car stopped at the ranch's entrance. 3 men in suits stepped out, clearly not from the area. "Good afternoon," said the one who appeared to be the leader. "We're from New Horizon Development. We'd like to speak with the owner about a business proposal." Mrs. Wilson received them on the porch, accompanied by Helen and Samuel. Madison played nearby but listened closely to the conversation. "I'm Richard Miller, the company's acquisitions director." The man introduced himself. "We have a very interesting offer for you." "What kind of offer?" Helen asked, instinctively taking on a protective role. "We want to buy the ranch for well above market value. It's a unique opportunity to secure a comfortable future for your family." Mrs. Wilson studied the men carefully before responding. "And what would that amount be?" "We're prepared to offer 2 million reais, Richard announced with a smile that tried to be convincing. It was truly an impressive sum, far more than any ranch in the area was worth. Helen and Samuel exchanged surprised glances, but Mrs. Wilson remained unmoved. "It's a generous offer," she said finally, "but the ranch is not for sale." "Ma'am, you don't understand," another man spoke up. "This is the future of the region. We'll bring development, jobs, tourism. You'd be contributing to progress. And what if I don't want to contribute to that kind of progress?" Well, Richard took over again, his tone less friendly. "That would be a shame, because other owners have already accepted our offers. You'd be surrounded by development and life here would become very complicated." The underlying threat wasn't lost on anyone. Helen stood up, her posture defensive. "I think this conversation is over. She's already told you the ranch isn't for sale." "Young lady, you don't understand the situation." Richard turned his attention to Helen. "We're a serious company with the resources to make things happen. It's better to accept our friendly offer now than to have problems later." It was then that Madison approached the group, her innocent presence contrasting with the tension. "What do you want to do with our ranch?" she asked with a child's curiosity. "We'll build hotels and restaurants, sweetheart," Richard replied, trying to sound kind. "It'll be very beautiful. And the animals, where will they go?" "Well, the animals will have to go somewhere else." Madison looked at the man with a seriousness beyond her years. "So you want to take the animals from their home to build buildings?" "It's progress, child. Sometimes changes are necessary." "My great-grandfather used to say real progress is when everyone gets better, including the animals," she replied, leaving the men visibly uncomfortable. Mrs. Wilson stood up, ending the conversation for good. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming, but my answer is no. This ranch will stay in the family." "You may regret that decision," Richard said as he walked to the car. "Is that a threat?" Samuel asked, stepping forward. "It's friendly advice," the man replied before getting into the vehicle. After the businessman left, the family gathered in the kitchen to discuss the situation. "They won't give up easily," Helen remarked. 2 million reais is a lot of money. They must have big plans for the area. "What if they try to cause trouble?" Samuel asked, worried. "We'll face that when it happens," Mrs. Wilson answered firmly. "This land has been in our family for over 100 years. I won't be the one to sell it to speculators." Madison, who had stayed quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. "Great-grandma, can I ask something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "If they build hotels here, will people be able to come see the animals?" "No, dear, they'd probably have to sell or move all the animals." "Then it's not a good idea," Madison concluded simply. "Emperor wouldn't like living somewhere else." The little girl's observation brought smiles to the adults' faces, but also strengthened their resolve to keep the ranch as it was. Over the following weeks, small problems began to arise. The feed deliveries arrived late or were of poorer quality. The electricity had several unexplained outages. The technician responsible for equipment maintenance started canceling visits at the last minute. "They're trying to pressure us," Helen noted after the third problem that week. "But it's not working," Samuel added proudly. "The ranch is still running fine. And it was. Despite the minor setbacks, daily life carried on as usual. Madison had become indispensable in caring for the animals, especially Emperor, who showed absolute loyalty to her. One morning, when Madison went to visit the bull as she did every day, she found him restless and uneasy. "What's wrong, big guy?" she asked, concerned. Emperor let out a low bellow and walked to the fence facing the road, staring intently toward the ranch entrance. "Do you see something I don't?" The bull remained alert, his instincts clearly sensing something wasn't right. That's when Madison heard the sound of engines approaching. Several cars were coming down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust. "Samuel!" she shouted. "There's a bunch of people coming." The ranch hand ran to where she stood and saw the caravan of vehicles approaching. "Go get your mom and Mrs. Wilson," he said urgently. "Hurry!" When the whole family gathered on the porch, they saw it was a large group of people, most dressed in work clothes and carrying what looked like surveying equipment. Richard Miller stepped out of the first car, accompanied by several men who clearly weren't from the area. "Good morning," he said without a hint of hesitation. "We're here to do some topographic surveys of the area." "Surveys for what?" Mrs. Wilson asked, her voice full of authority. "For the Regional Development Project. It's a survey authorized by the city." Helen stepped forward. "Authorized to enter private property without the owner's permission?" "We're only measuring the public land around the property," Richard replied evasively. But it was clear the men were spreading out across the ranch, some even entering the pastures where the animals were. "Get off my property now," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "Ma'am, you're obstructing a project of public interest," one of Richard's companions responded. "We can get a court order if needed." That's when something happened that completely changed the situation. Emperor, who had been watching the strangers from a distance, began stirring in his pen. His bellows grew louder and more frequent, clearly showing discomfort with the intrusion. "Madison," Helen said quickly, "go calm Emperor before he hurts himself." The girl ran to the corral, where she found the bull visibly stressed. The strange men, the noise of the cars, all the commotion had stirred his protective instincts. "Easy there, big guy," she said softly, approaching the fence. "I know you don't like them here." "I don't either." Emperor moved closer to her but remained alert, his eyes fixed on the intruders. "You want to protect our home, don't you?" Madison kept talking. "But you don't need to worry, we won't let them hurt anyone." The men from the development company had spread across the pastures and were planting small stakes in the ground, clearly marking specific spots. Some of them approached the corral where Emperor was, intrigued by the animal. "That's a fine bull," one of them remarked. "Must be worth a pretty penny." "Careful," another replied. "I heard he's aggressive." That's when Madison noticed they were getting too close to the corral, some even trying to touch the gate latches. "Don't touch that," she said loudly enough to be heard. "Relax, girl," one of the men answered. "We're just taking a look." But Emperor clearly didn't like their approach. He began pacing back and forth in the corral, snorting loudly and showing his agitation. "He doesn't like strangers," Madison explained. "You'd better step back." "The thing's gonna blow," one of the men laughed, ignoring the warning. Then one of them, trying to impress his co-workers, decided to hit the fence with a stick he was carrying. Emperor's reaction was immediate and explosive. The bull charged the fence with full force, shaking the entire structure and creating a noise that echoed across the ranch. The men quickly backed away, clearly startled by the animal's display of strength. "Good Lord, that thing really is dangerous," one of them shouted. Madison ran to the fence, her heart racing with worry. "Emperor, easy," she said, reaching out toward him. The bull turned to her immediately, his agitation fading at the sight of her familiar face. He moved closer to the fence and let her touch his forehead, visibly calming down. "It's okay," she whispered. "They'll be gone soon." The scene even impressed the men from the development company. Emperor's instant transformation from a raging beast to a docile animal was impossible to ignore. "How'd she do that?" one of them asked, amazed. "The girl's got a special gift," Samuel answered proudly, rushing over after hearing the commotion. Richard Miller approached the group, his interest clearly piqued by what he'd just seen. "Interesting," he remarked. "A trained bull could be a valuable tourist attraction." The way he said it made Helen's blood boil. My daughter and our animals are not tourist attractions, she said firmly. Everything's negotiable, Ma'am, Richard replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Wilson, who had arrived at the scene, overheard the exchange and felt a rage she hadn't known in years. Gentlemen, you are trespassing on my property and harassing my family. You have exactly 5 minutes to leave before I call the authorities. Ma'am, we have authorization from the city to measure public land, not to enter my property and disturb my animals. The tension in the air was palpable. The men from the development company clearly hadn't expected such organized resistance, and Emperor's show of strength had left some visibly nervous. Fine, Richard finally conceded. We'll wrap up for today, but we'll be back. With a court order or not, they won't be back, Helen replied. After the intruders left, the family gathered on the porch to discuss what had happened. They won't give up, Samuel observed. They have too much invested in this. And now they know about Madison's connection to Emperor, Helen added, worried. I didn't like the way that man looked at her. We'll have to be more careful, Mrs. Wilson agreed, but we won't give in to the pressure. Madison, who had stayed quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. Great-Grandma, do you think they could take Emperor away? The innocent question touched on the fear everyone felt, but no one wanted to voice. They won't take a thing, Mrs. Wilson replied firmly. This is our home, and we'll protect it. That night, Samuel suggested someone should keep watch in the early hours, in case the developer's men tried to return when no one was awake. I can help, Madison offered immediately. No, sweetheart, Helen answered. That's a job for adults. But I know all the sounds of the ranch. If anything unusual happens, I'll know. Mrs. Wilson considered the girl's offer. It was true, Madison had developed a connection to the property that went beyond what any adult could have in such a short time. How about you stay in a room that overlooks the pastures, she suggested. If you see anything strange, you can wake us. Madison eagerly agreed, feeling important for being able to help protect the ranch. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on the family grew in different ways. Suppliers began cancelling contracts, citing various issues. The bank financing part of the ranch's operations started questioning their ability to pay. Even some neighbors began talking about the advantages of selling to the outside businessmen. They're isolating us, Helen remarked during a family conversation. It's a strategy to weaken us. But it's working, Samuel admitted regretfully. It's getting harder to keep the ranch running. Mrs. Wilson, however, remained firm in her decision. This land has seen 3 generations of our family grow. I won't be the one to hand it over to speculators. What if they actually get a court order? Helen asked, being practical. We'll deal with that if it happens. It was during this time of pressure that something unexpected occurred, changing the entire course of the situation. One morning, when Madison went to visit Emperor, as she did every day, she found an elderly woman standing near the corral, watching the bull with deep emotion. Excuse me, Madison said politely. Are you lost? The woman turned, revealing a face marked by time, but with bright, intelligent eyes. No, dear. I was looking for exactly this place. There was something familiar in the woman's voice, something that made Madison feel immediately at ease in her presence. Do you know our ranch? I do. I worked here many years ago, when I was as young as you. Madison's heart raced. Could it be? You wouldn't be Rose, would you? The elderly woman smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, my love. And you must be Madison, my great-granddaughter. The reunion was emotional. Madison rushed to hug the great-grandmother she'd never met, while Rose held the girl as if embracing a lost treasure. How did you know we were here? Madison asked when they pulled apart. A friend of mine from Seven Lakes told me she'd seen Helen at the ranch. I couldn't believe you'd all come back home. Great-Grandma Rose, Madison suddenly exclaimed. There's so much for you to see. The Emperor, great-grandmother Margaret. Is Margaret here? Rose asked, her voice heavy with complex emotions. Yes, she is. She's very kind to us. Would you like to meet her? Rose hesitated for a moment, clearly nervous at the prospect of reuniting with the wife of the man she had loved decades ago. Maybe it's better if I don't. Please, Madison insisted. She'll be so happy to see you. The meeting between Rose and Margaret was charged with emotion. The two women stared at each other for long seconds before either spoke. "Rose," Margaret finally said, her voice trembling. "You came back." "Margaret," Rose replied, equally moved. "I hope you don't mind me being here." "Mind?" Margaret stepped forward and, to everyone's surprise, embraced Rose warmly. "Your family. You always were." Helen, who had come running when Madison called her, watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. Seeing her grandmother's mother, who had been an almost mythical figure in her life, felt surreal. "Grandma Rose," she said, when it was her turn to greet the elderly woman. "You have no idea how important it is for me to be here." "My dear Helen," Rose replied, studying her granddaughter's face intently. "You look just like your mother at your age." Over lunch, Rose shared stories of her life after leaving the ranch. She had married a good man from Seven Lakes, raised her daughter with love and dignity, and worked hard to give her family a comfortable life. "But I always carried the pain of leaving this place," she admitted, "and the guilt of never telling my daughter the truth." "Why didn't you?" Helen asked gently. "Because I was afraid she'd feel rejected, as if she wasn't wanted. I'd rather she grew up thinking her father had left for other reasons." Margaret reached across the table and held Rose's hand. "Anthony never forgave himself for not trying to find you. He told me everything before he passed. He said his greatest regret in life was not fighting to keep the family together." "He was a good man," Rose said softly. "But the situation was too complicated for that time." Madison, who had been listening carefully to the whole conversation, finally asked something that had been puzzling her. "Great-Grandma Rose, can you also talk to animals?" Rose smiled, a nostalgic expression crossing her face. "I could, my dear. It was a gift my mother taught me, and her mother taught her. It's always been in our family." "Can you teach me more?" Madison asked hopefully. "I can try, but it seems you already know so much on your own." Rose stayed at the ranch for the following days, and her presence brought new energy to the entire property. She helped Madison better understand her connection with the animals, teaching her ancient techniques passed down through generations. "The secret," she explained one afternoon as they watched Emperor grazing peacefully, "isn't about controlling the animal, but understanding what it's feeling and responding with kindness." "That's what I do," Madison agreed. "I can feel when he's sad or happy." "Exactly. It's a conversation from the heart, not the mind." But the peace of those days was interrupted when Richard Miller appeared at the ranch again, this time with more people and an even more aggressive stance. "Mrs. Wilson," he said bluntly, "I've brought a final offer. $3 million for the property. This is the last one. And I've already given my final answer," Margaret replied. "The ranch is not for sale." "Then I'm forced to inform you that we've obtained a court order to conduct a full survey of the property. We'll determine if there are any irregularities in the documentation or land use." Helen stood up immediately. "What kind of irregularities?" "Improper use of water resources, environmental issues, problems with ownership documentation," Richard listed with a sly smile. "There are many things that could be wrong with an old property like this." Rose, who had remained silent during the conversation, finally spoke up. "Young man," she said with the authority of someone who had lived many decades, "this ranch has been in the Wilson family for over 100 years. There are no irregularities here." "And who are you?" Richard asked dismissively. "I'm someone who knows the history of this land better than any paper you might have in your hand." The tension was palpable, but it was broken by Madison, who approached the group with Majestic following her obediently through the pasture. "Richard," she said, using the name she'd heard the adults say, "why do you want our ranch so badly?" The businessman looked at the girl impatiently. "Child, these are adult matters. But if you want our home, I can ask why, right? Because we're going to build something modern and important here. Hotels, restaurants, tourist attractions. And where will the animals live? The animals will go somewhere else. That's how progress works." Madison looked at Majestic, who had stopped near the fence and was watching the conversation intently. "Majestic," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "what do you think about moving somewhere else?" The bull let out a low, almost melancholy moo. "He said he doesn't want to," Madison translated seriously. This is his home just like it's ours. Some of Richard's associates smiled condescendingly, but the businessman himself seemed irritated by the girl's unsettling simplicity. Child animals don't talk. You don't understand because you don't know how to listen, Madison replied with the straightforward honesty of children. My great-grandmother Rose taught me that if you pay attention, animals do talk. It was then that Rose stepped closer to Madison and to everyone's surprise did something no one expected. She approached the fence where Majestic stood and began humming a soft melody, almost a whisper. The bull reacted immediately, moving closer and lowering his head in complete submission and trust. My God, Mrs. Wilson whispered. It's the same melody Anthony used to hum. Rose continued the song for a few minutes, and Majestic remained completely hypnotized, as if listening to the voice of an old friend. When she stopped, the bull calmly stepped back, but not before gently touching Rose's outstretched arm with his muzzle. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the most skeptical men on Richard's team had witnessed something they couldn't explain. How did you do that? One of them asked in awe. It's a song I learned a long time ago, Rose replied simply, from someone who loved this place and these animals very much. Richard, realizing he was losing control of the situation, tried to regain authority. Very touching, but it changes nothing. We have a court order and will proceed with the property survey. Then do it, Mrs. Wilson said with a calm that surprised everyone. But do it quickly, because you won't find any irregularities. We'll see, Richard replied, signaling for his men to spread out. Over the next few hours, the development team combed every corner of the ranch, photographing, measuring, and noting everything they could. Madison followed them at a distance, always with Majestic nearby, watching their every move. They're looking for something specific, she remarked to Rose during a break. They're looking for an excuse to take this place from us, Rose answered. But they won't find one because this ranch has always been run with honesty. By the end of the day, when the team gathered to discuss their findings, Richard looked visibly frustrated. Did you find anything? He asked his assistants. The property is completely in order, one of them replied. Perfect documentation, compliance with all environmental regulations, up-to-date permits, not a single irregularity. Richard turned red with anger but tried to maintain his composure. Mrs. Wilson, he finally said, this was our last friendly attempt. From now on, we'll use other methods to acquire this property. What methods? Helen asked, worried. Legal methods, of course, he replied with a smile that fooled no one. After the team left, the family gathered on the porch to discuss the situation. They'll try something, Samuel said with certainty. Men like that don't give up easily. But what else can they do? Helen asked. The property is all in order. They can fabricate problems, Rose answered with the wisdom of someone who's lived a long life. Powerful businessmen have many resources. Margaret stayed quiet for a moment, thinking. Maybe it's time we seek some allies, she finally said. What kind of allies? Madison asked. The community, the neighbors, the people who've lived here for generations and understand the value of preserving our traditions. Margaret's suggestion proved wise. In the following days, they began visiting neighbors and discovered many local landowners were concerned about the developers' pressure. They've already bought 3 ranches this month, shared Mrs. Martinez, owner of a neighboring property. They're offering a lot of money, but once families sell, they leave the area and never return. And do you know what they do with the land? Asked another neighbor, Mrs. Irwin. They tear everything down. Old houses, century-old trees, everything turns to rubble. Helen felt her heart tighten hearing these accounts. It was clear the developer had no respect for local history and culture. We need to organize, Rose suggested. Together, we're stronger than apart. The idea was well received, and within days an informal resistance group formed, made up of landowners refusing to sell. During a meeting at the main house of Willow Creek Ranch, neighbors discussed strategies to withstand the pressure. The problem is they have a lot of money, observed Mr. Mitchell, owner of a small farm. They can hire expensive lawyers, influence officials. But we have something they don't, Madison suddenly said, surprising the adults with her contribution. What's that, dear? Asked Mrs. Martinez. We have roots. They're outsiders. They don't know our land, don't love it like we do. The girl's observation brought a moment of reflection for everyone present. The child is right, Rose agreed. They only see money where we see history, family life. It was during this meeting that the game-changing idea emerged. What if we organized a festival, suggested Mrs. Irwin, a celebration of the region's rural traditions to show everyone what we're fighting for? A country fair. Margaret warmed to the idea. Exactly, with animal shows, traditional food, folk music, to prove our culture is worth more than any luxury hotel. And Madison could do a presentation with Emperor, Helen added, embracing the spirit of the proposal. Madison lit up at the possibility. I really could. Emperor would love meeting new people as long as they're good people. The idea quickly gained momentum, and within days the whole community was mobilized to organize the event. Rose proved a natural organizer, using her life experience to coordinate preparations. Helen applied her administrative skills to handle logistics. Madison and Samuel took charge of preparing the animals for the shows. It's going to be beautiful, Madison remarked one afternoon as she brushed Emperor. You'll be able to show everyone how gentle and smart you are. The bull seemed to understand the girl's excitement, displaying an energy he hadn't shown in months. But not everything was going smoothly. 2 days before the festival, Richard showed up at the ranch again, this time accompanied only by an assistant. Mrs. Wilson, he said, his tone more conciliatory than in previous visits, I've come to make one final offer. I've already said I'm not interested in selling. $4 million, he announced. It's my final and definitive offer. It was an astronomical sum, more than any farming family could ever dream of having. The silence that followed was heavy, everyone absorbing the magnitude of the amount offered. That's a lot of money, Helen murmured, almost involuntarily. It's enough for you all to live comfortably for the rest of your lives, Richard pressed. You could buy a smaller property somewhere else, invest the rest and never worry about money again. Margaret looked around, studying the face of each family member. For a moment, she seemed to waver. $4 million, she repeated slowly. In cash. Bank transfer today if you sign the contract. That's when Madison approached the group, coming from the pasture where she had been playing with some calves. What are you talking about? She asked with the natural curiosity of a child. Mr. Richard wants to give us a lot of money for the ranch, Helen explained. Oh, Madison seemed to process the information. And where would we live? Somewhere else, sweetheart, Richard answered. A very nice place with a modern house maybe near the city. What about our animals? Well, the animals would stay here and other people would take care of them. Madison looked at him with an expression mixing confusion and disbelief. Other people, but they're part of our family. We can't leave family behind. Sweetheart, they're just animals. You can have other animals at the new place. They're not just animals, Madison replied, with a firmness that surprised everyone present. They're our friends. Emperor is my best friend. How could you think I'd abandon my best friend? The simplicity and sincerity of the girl's response deeply moved all the adults. Madison is right, Rose finally said. You don't abandon family, no matter how much money they offer. And besides, Margaret added, her decision now firm, this land isn't just ours. It belongs to all the generations that came before and all those yet to come. I don't have the right to sell it. Richard realized he had lost for good, but couldn't hide his frustration. You'll regret this decision, he said as he walked to his car. There are other ways to get what we want. After he left, the family stood in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the weight of the choice they had made. Did we do the right thing? Helen asked, still stunned by the amount they had refused. We did, Margaret replied with conviction, and we'll prove it at this weekend's festival. The Harvest Festival took place on a sunny autumn Saturday. People from all over the region came to experience the rural traditions being celebrated. Entire families, children, elders, all curious to see the performances that had been advertised. The highlight of the festival was, without a doubt, Madison's presentation with Emperor. The girl had trained a few simple routines with the bull, based on the mutual trust they had developed. Everyone, she said into the microphone, with the surprising poise of an 8-year-old, I'd like to introduce you to my friend Emperor. The bull entered the makeshift arena with the dignity of a king, his movements controlled and elegant. When Madison gave the simple commands they had practiced, he obeyed with a precision that left the audience stunned. "So just look," Madison continued as Emperor knelt before her. "He's not fierce, he's gentle and smart. He just needs kindness and respect." The performance ended with Madison riding on Emperor's back, taking a slow lap around the arena as the crowd cheered emotionally. "This is what we want to preserve," Rose said into the microphone when the show was over. "It's not just a ranch, it's a way of life, a connection with nature that can't be bought with money." The event was an absolute success. Hundreds of people visited the properties, met the animals, tasted the traditional foods, and listened to the stories of the farming families. Most importantly, the celebration caught the attention of the regional press. Journalists from several cities came to cover the event, and the story of the girl who tamed bulls began to spread. "It's extraordinary," commented a TV reporter while interviewing Madison. "How did you learn to communicate with animals?" "My great-grandmother Rose taught me that anyone can talk to animals. You just have to listen with your heart," Madison replied simply. The story aired on the local news and quickly gained traction. Within days, the tale of Willow Creek Ranch and the girl who saved an aggressive bull was being shared on TV programs and news sites. The media attention brought something the family hadn't expected: tourists. People from various cities started showing up at the ranch, eager to meet Madison and Emperor. "We could turn this into an opportunity," Helen suggested during a family meeting. "An educational rural tourism experience, showing city folks the traditions of the countryside." The idea was well received, and soon Willow Creek Ranch became a sought-after destination for families wanting to give their children a hands-on experience with nature and animals. Madison proved to be a natural guide, teaching visiting kids to respect animals and understand their behavior. Emperor became the star attraction, always docile and gentle with visitors. "It's amazing how he behaves," remarked one father who had brought his children to see the ranch. "I've never seen such a calm bull." "He's not calm," Madison corrected politely. "He's strong and powerful, but when you treat him with kindness, he returns it." The success of rural tourism brought financial stability to the ranch, something it hadn't seen in years. Even more importantly, it brought public recognition of the property's cultural and educational value. Then, something unexpected happened. Richard showed up at the ranch again, but this time his behavior was completely different. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, tipping his hat in a show of respect he hadn't displayed before, "I've come to apologize for my past behavior." The family gathered on the porch, curious to hear what he had to say. "Apologize for what?" Margaret asked cautiously. "Because I realized I was wrong. Not just in trying to force the sale, but in failing to understand the true value of this place." Helen studied the man's face, trying to detect sincerity in his words. "What made you change your mind?" "The media coverage, the reports about the ranch, the girl and the bull, the rural traditions. Our investors realized you have something far more valuable than land for development." "And what would that be?" Rose asked skeptically. "You have an authentic story, a brand, something that can't be built or bought." Madison, who had stayed quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. "So you're saying we're useful for your plans now?" The girl's direct question left Richard visibly uncomfortable. "It's not quite like that, child." "Then what is it like?" she insisted, with the persistence typical of children. Richard sighed before answering. "We want to propose a partnership. Keep the ranch as it is, but develop tourist infrastructure around it. Hotels and restaurants in a separate area that would direct visitors to you." "And what would our part in this partnership be?" Helen asked, drawing on her professional experience. "You'd retain full control over the ranch and receive a percentage of all profits from the tourist complex. It would be a way to preserve traditions while benefiting economically from development." It was a smart proposal, one that recognized the ranch's value without trying to destroy it. "We need to think about it," Margaret finally said. "Of course. I'll leave a draft of the proposal for you to review." After Richard left, the family gathered to discuss the new situation. "It's very different from the pressure they used to put on us," Helen observed. But it still means change, Rose considered. Hotels and restaurants will bring a lot more people, a lot more activity. And that could be good or bad, Samuel added, depending on how it's done. Madison sat on the floor playing with a kitten that had recently appeared on the ranch. What do you think, Madison? Margaret asked, valuing the girl's opinion. I think it depends on whether they'll respect our animals and our way of life, she answered after a moment's thought. If it helps more people understand how important it is to care for nature, it could be good. The girl's simple wisdom guided the family's final decision. After several weeks of negotiation, they accepted a modified version of Richard's proposal. The tourist complex would be built in an area away from the main house with controlled access to the ranch. The family would retain full autonomy over their activities, and a significant percentage of profits would go toward preserving the region's rural traditions. Most importantly, it was agreed that Madison would have an official educational role in the project, teaching visitors about the connection between humans and animals. It'll be like an outdoor school, she explained excitedly to Emperor. We'll teach everyone how special you all are. The bull lowed softly, as if approving the plan. In the following months, Willow Creek Ranch became the center of a pioneering sustainable rural tourism project. The complex built nearby respected local architecture and used eco-friendly technology. Madison became the country's youngest environmental educator, developing a program that taught children and adults about animal behavior and the importance of preserving rural traditions. The most important thing, she always said during her presentations, is to understand that animals aren't so different from us. They feel, they think, they remember. We just have to stop and listen. Helen took over the management of the tourism project, applying her professional expertise to ensure everything ran efficiently and sustainably. Rose became the official guardian of traditions, sharing stories of rural families with visitors and teaching ancient animal handling techniques. Margaret, at 70 years old, finally saw the ranch thrive in a way that honored both the past and the future. Samuel was promoted to general supervisor, coordinating a team of local workers hired to handle the growing operations. And Emperor? He became the undisputed star of it all. His transformation from an aggressive bull to a gentle, well-mannered animal inspired hundreds of visitors to rethink their relationship with animals. It's a miracle, remarked a visiting veterinarian from Sao Paulo. I've never seen such a dramatic and lasting behavioral change. It's not a miracle, Madison corrected gently. It's love. When you truly love, anything becomes possible. A year after Helen and Madison's first visit to the ranch, the property was welcoming over 1,000 visitors each month. The project had become a model of sustainable development, studied by universities and replicated in other regions. More importantly, it had created a stable income source for dozens of rural families in the area who sold their handmade goods and offered services to tourists. We did it, Helen said one Sunday morning as she watched Madison teach a lesson on animal behavior to a group of visiting children. We saved the ranch and created something even greater. We didn't just save the ranch, Rose corrected with the wisdom of her many years. We saved a way of life. And thanks to Madison, we'll be able to pass it on to future generations. Margaret, seated in the rocking chair that had once belonged to her husband, watched the activity with a smile of deep contentment. Anthony would be proud, she murmured. His great-granddaughter has become the guardian of the land he loved so much. That afternoon, as she did every day, Madison went to visit Emperor in the pasture. The bull saw her approaching and walked toward her, his movements dignified and calm. "Hello, my friend," she said, stroking his forehead. "Another good day, huh?" Emperor lowered his head, allowing her to press her face against his neck. It was a moment of pure connection, summing up everything that had happened. A girl in a red dress who knelt before an enraged bull and discovered that behind the anger lay only sadness and loneliness. "You know what I've learned," Madison whispered to the bull. "We don't need to be afraid of those who are different from us. We just need the patience to understand what they're feeling." The sun began to set over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected in Emperor's calm eyes. In the distance, the main house glowed warmly, preparing to welcome the family for dinner. "Shall we?" Madison asked the bull. Time to go home. And together the girl and the bull walked slowly toward the barn, a perfect symbol of the harmony achieved through love, patience, and the courage of a child who believed everyone deserves a second chance. The end of the story. What a beautiful journey we've shared. The story of Madison and Emperor teaches us that with love and understanding, even the most difficult situations can be transformed. Now, tell us, do you believe in this special connection between humans and animals? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your heartfelt stories with us in the comments. Don't forget to like if this story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring tales like this one.